Alright, so let's take a look. So we have our solving right triangles. So we already know that our sine of any angle is going to be our opposite over hypotenuse. Our cosine of any angle is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent of the angle is opposite over adjacent. So we have our three trig functions that we've already been using. Now, just as a reminder, if we were to have a right triangle such as this is our first example, and let's say that we have A, B, C, and side length of, let's just say, X, Y, Z. Well, so sine, we're going to go ahead and just go from angle A. So sine of A is going to be our opposite side over our hypotenuse. So we're going to have Y over X. And then cosine of A is going to be our adjacent over our hypotenuse, which is Z over X. And last, our tangent of A is going to be Y over Z, opposite over adjacent. So we can find our trig functions, and if there were numbers there, you could also tell me the reduced version of the ratio. Now, something that is very important as we move on, you need to make sure that your calculator is in degree mode. And in order to do this, what you're going to do is you're going to take out your calculators, turn them on, obviously, and hit the mode button. It is up at the top near the second button. So you're going to hit the mode button. You're going to scroll down until you see something that says radian and degree. You're going to make sure that degree is highlighted. And if it's not, scroll over to degree, hit enter, and make sure it blinks that it's highlighted. And now this means that your calculator is going to do everything in degree mode, because we're only working with degrees. So then after that you can hit second mode, which will quit that menu. This will make sure that all your answers are correct. So once you have that done in your calculator and you have it in degree mode, you always want to make sure that you check this, because for any test or anything, the calculators will be cleared before you start. And always remember degree mode. The way that we usually always say to remember is, man, it must be 90 degrees in here, because the rooms are always so warm. Alright, well, let's moving on. Getting out of that. So what if we had a triangle like this, and say that we have X and 6, and our angle measure is 73 degrees. Alright, so this angle, since it's the one we know, is one we're working with. Alright, so from this angle, we know the adjacent side, and we know the hypotenuse. Well, the trig function that uses adjacent and hypotenuse is going to be your cosine of that angle. So cosine of that angle is going to be X over 6. And all we did, we set it up the same way that we normally do, only we have an angle measure now, where we just had an angle letter. So now we look at our problem here, and we see that right here we have a fraction. We have a divide by 6. Now, we need to get that 6 out from underneath that X. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides by 6 to get it out from there. So when we multiply, those cancel out, and we have 6 times cosine of 73 degrees equals X. Now, when you go ahead and put this into your calculator, you can put it in just like you see it. Only there will be your parentheses there. So when you go ahead and do that, you'll find that X equals about 1.75. And what this means is that this side length right here is 1.75 then. And so once you find that, you have found your missing side length. So this is your final answer. And normally we'll round that to 2 decimal places unless otherwise noted. If it's noted, round to the nearest whole number, round to the nearest whatever, make sure that you do that. Alright, So now we have our next triangle. Say this is 37 degrees, and we have x and 12. Well, from this angle, we have our opposite side and our adjacent side. So the trig function that we use is tangent of 37 degrees equals x over 12. So we have our ratio set up, and remember, if you need to go back and look at SOHCAHTOA or write it on your paper so you know which trig function to use, that is always okay to do, because you always need a little bit of a reminder. So let's look at this. Well, we're dividing by 12, so the opposite of dividing by 12 is multiply by 12 on both sides. So that cancels out, and when we go ahead and put that into our calculators, we'll get x equals 9.04. And what that means is that this side right here is 9.04 units long. So if you're dealing with feet or inches or meters or whatever, that's what that means. Alright, so now another example that we have is we have this one right here, where we have the 72 degrees right there, and x and 6. Alright, so from this angle, we have the adjacent side, and then we have the hypotenuse right here. So the function that we're going to use is the one that uses adjacent over hypotenuse, which is cosine of 72 degrees equals 6 over x. Well, our x is in the bottom of our ratio right here. So what we need to do is we need to get it out of the bottom of the ratio. So in order to do that, we're dividing here. So we're going to multiply both sides by x. And when these cancel out, so we're left with x times cosine of 72 degrees equals 6. Well, our x is not by itself yet. So in order to do that, we're multiplying here. So opposite of multiplying is dividing. We're going to divide by the cosine of 72 degrees on both sides. And that cancels out, so all that's left is x. And you can go ahead and put that straight in your calculator and have it 6 divided by cosine of 72. And you can put that in your calculator just as is to make sure that you get the right answer. So when you do that, you'll get x equals 19.42. And what that means is that is our longest side. So that is our hypotenuse that goes right here. And just to double check, you might want to make sure that this length that we found is going to be longer than any other length. Because remember, our hypotenuse is going to be our longest side. So you may want to just double check and make sure that that's true. So then, as we move on, you'll find that depending on where the sides are and where the unknown side is, you may have to do a little bit more work to find that side. So we have 15%, or 15 degrees, and we have 16, and we have x. Well, from this angle, we have the opposite side and the hypotenuse. So we're going to use sine of 15 degrees equals 16 over x. Now again, we have x in the bottom of our fraction. So to get it out, we multiply by x on both sides, and that cancels. So we have x times sine of 15 degrees equals 16. We are multiplying, so opposite of multiplying is divide, and you're going to divide by that sine of 15 degrees on both sides. Remember, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other, and then when you divide that, you are going to get 61.82. And remember, this is going to be your hypotenuse right here, so make sure that that is indeed longer than that other side. Okay? So one more, and then I'm going to leave you loose on something to do on your own. So let's look at this one. So we've got our 90-degree angle. We've got 21 degrees and x and 22. Well, so from our angle here, we have our opposite side and our hypotenuse. So again, we're going to use sine of 21 degrees equals x over 22. Now you see we have a divide by 22. So opposite divide by 22, we're going to multiply by 22. So x equals 22 times sine of 21 degrees. And we find that x equals 7.88. And again, instead of having the hypotenuse that we found, we're finding this side here. So we want to make sure that that side is going to be smaller than our hypotenuse. And it is. So we did it correctly. Good job. So now go ahead and you're going to be working on some on your own. So you have this angle right here, 56 degrees. And we're going to have this side length of 12, and you're going to find the hypotenuse. And then we have one that we have the right triangle there, and we're going to call this 34 degrees and have x and 15. And then number 3, we have our last triangle here, and we're going to have this be 25 degrees, and this is x, and this is 15. So go ahead and find x for all 3 of those, and then come back, and we will, so after you pause the video, we'll come back and look at them. Alright, so let's look at this one. So we have our angle here, and we have opposite, and we have our hypotenuse. So we're going to use sine of 56 degrees is 12 over x. Now again, we have divide by x, so which means we're going to multiply by x on both sides to get it out from underneath the fraction. So we have x times sine of 56 degrees equals 12. Well, we're multiplying by x here, so we're going to divide by sine of 56 degrees on both sides. So that way, we have x equals 12 divided by sine of 56, which again you can put right in your calculator and you'll get 14.47 as your x. Now remember, this is your hypotenuse here, so make sure it is longer than that other side that you did. Alright, from the 34 angle, we have our opposite and our adjacent. So we have tangent of 34 degrees equals x over 15, because we have opposite over adjacent. So we're dividing by 15, so we're going to multiply both sides by that 15 to get it out from underneath the fraction. So we have 15 times tangent of 34 degrees equals x. So you can put that straight into your calculator and you'll get that x equals 10.12. And that is that side, which is x. And finally, you have your angle of 25 degrees. You have opposite and hypotenuse again. So you're going to use sine of 25 degrees equals x over 15. And so then we're dividing by 15, so we're going to multiply by that bottom number to get it out of there. So x equals 15 times sine of 25, which is going to be 6.34. So that is how you find the missing side length for right triangles using the trig ratios. So now you'll have a worksheet to do, and make sure that you are following the sine, cosine, and tangent ratios that we all know. And then come back and we'll talk a little bit more about finding side length and also missing angles as well. Alright, so real quick, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a new thing, and it's when we talk about finding an angle of a triangle given two sides. Given two of our sides, we're going to find the missing angle. So basically, kind of like when we found the missing side, we're going to be finding the missing angle instead. And we're going to be using inverse trig functions for that. And when we talk about inverse, we're going to talk about that in just another minute. So instead of drawing a triangle, we're just going to have sine of b equals 0.4848. So which trig function do you see there? Well, you see sine. Alright? Now remember, your calculator should be in degree mode at this point. Should still be in degree mode. Now, what you can do is our inverse function, if you look on your calculator, you'll see your little button that says sine. Above it, you're going to see a little writing that says this. This part right here is your inverse function. So you're going to hit second, so the second button, and then you're going to hit that sine button. And on your screen, you should see this, sine and a little -1 up top as an exponent. This means inverse of sine. So, just like multiplication is the inverse of division and addition is the inverse of subtraction, sine with the little -1 is sine inverse of the sine function. So when we have our problem here, what we're going to do is we are going to do sine inverse of both sides. So sine inverse of both sides. This cancels that completely out. So we get the angle B is sine inverse of 0.4848. Now, when we put that into our calculator, it's going to look exactly like that. And we're going to get that angle B is going to be about 29 degrees. Now, the thing about our answers when we're trying to find the angle is it's always going to be in degree. Because of we're finding an angle, and our angles are in degrees. So, then for the next example, if we had the next example of, say, cosine of W is 0.5317. Well, our function we're using is cosine, so we're going to use cosine inverse of both sides. Now, when I write it down here, down below this, that just means that I'm doing it to both sides. So, this part cancels out, and so W equals cosine inverse of 0.5317. And again, you put that right into your calculator and you find that that is going to make W be 57.9 degrees. And if you wanted to round up, if it allows you to round up, 58 degrees. Because when we find the inverse function of the number that we're given. So, another example. Say we're given tangent of B. And say that's going to be 0.5878. 0.5878. Well, our ratio or our trig function is tangent. So we're going to use tangent inverse of both sides. And that cancels out. So B equals tangent inverse of 0.5878. And again, you can put that right into your calculator and find that the answer, the angle of B is going to be 30.5 degrees or about 31 degrees with rounding. So when you look at this, you have to look at which sine function you're using and use the inverse sine function. And to find that on your calculator, it's always the second button and then whatever trig function you're using. So this one was the tan button. So second tan will give you the tangent inverse of the function. So just a few more examples for you to work, and then come back and we will look over them. So if we have cosine of A equals 19.0811, tangent of X is 0.4226 and round it off nicely and say sine of W is going to be 0.7532. So go ahead and figure those out on your own and then come back and we'll go over them. Alright, so since we're using cosine, we're going to use cosine inverse of both sides. So cosine inverse. So A is going to equal cosine inverse of 19.0811. And when we put that into our calculator, we are going to get an answer. And actually, when we put that into our calculator, what do we find? We find that we get an error message. So what that means is that this does not give us that this is not possible. When we have an error message, it's not possible. So let's move on. So let's look at the tangent problem. So when we do this one, we're using tangent, and we're going to have tangent with that little -1, which is inverse. So x is going to be tangent inverse of 0.4226, which is 22.9, or about 23 degrees. Okay? So the angle that gave us the tangent of 0.4226, that angle is about 23 degrees. So here we're using sine inverse of both sides, and we find that W equals sine inverse of 0.7532, which will give us the number 48.9, which is about 49 degrees. So this is how you find the missing angle for any right triangle using their trig. So go ahead and start the worksheet, and you also have homework on missing side length.